It is difficult to imagine the Philippine educational landscape without the private schools. The private schools help the state fulfill its mandate of making quality education accessible to all Filipinos. It is in recognition of this role that the Fund for Assistance to Private Education, a permanent trust fund for private education, was established through Executive Order 156 on November 5, 1968. The Private Education Assistance Committee, or the PEAC, was created as the trustee of the fund. The PEAC is composed of the Secretary of Education as the ex officio chair and a representative each from the National Economic Development Authority, Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines, Philippine Association of Colleges and Universities, and Association of Christian Schools, Colleges, and Universities. For the development of private education, the PEAC takes on the role of funder, advocate, partner, and enabler. A national secretariat headed by an executive director executes the policies, programs, and initiatives of the PEAC for private education. In 1989, a landmark piece of legislation, RA 6728, or the Government Assistance to Students and Teachers in Private Education, or GASPE, was passed. The GASPE Act, which was amended by RA 8545 in 1998, institutionalized government assistance to private education in the country. The Educational Service Contracting, or ESC, Teacher Salary Subsidy, or TSS, Senior High School Voucher Program, the In-Service Training, or INSET, and Research are part of the Department of Education's GASPE program. The PEAC implements the GASPE program given the track record of the PEAC in program management. The PEAC has been involved in the development of the ESC, from piloting a scheme, which was a precursor to the ESC in 1982 to 1986, to implementing the ESC in 1986 to 1991, and from 1996 up to the present. The ESC today has close to 1 million beneficiaries. Part of the PEAC infrastructure for the GASPE program is the Regional Secretariat. The PEAC-RS is headed by the Regional Program Director, who designates a Regional Program Coordinator for the day-to-day program implementation in the region. The PEAC has the following responsibilities in the GASPE program: orientation, ESC certification, SHS voucher applications, processing, monitoring, resolving cases of schools with adverse findings, regular meetings and consultations with stakeholders, research and data gathering, in-service training. The PEAC is also accredited as a local continuing professional development, or CPD, provider by the Professional Regulation Commission, or PRC. Participants of the INSET programs offered by the PEAC have the opportunity to earn the required CPD units for the renewal of their professional licenses. From 2012 to 2017, the PEAC trained a total of more than 70,000 junior high school teachers, and since 2016, an estimated 17,000 SHS teachers. The PEAC also implements its own programs of assistance. The Assistance to Programs and Initiatives to Reform Education, or ASPIRE, gave funding support in the amount of 33.7 million to 99 projects of private educational associations since 2015 to 2016. The Research for School Improvement Towards Excellence has assisted 79 private school administrators and teachers writing their theses and dissertation since 2015 to 2016. The Dissemination Assistance to Research and Education, or DARE, has supported 16 faculty members who presented their papers in international conferences abroad since it was launched in 2016 to 2017. The Philippine Education Research Journal is an online resource for decision makers, policymakers, and practitioners in education. Its editorial board consists of highly respected educators and researchers. The Philippine Education Conference is an opportunity for school administrators and teachers to learn from educational leaders and experts here and abroad as they discuss educational issues, concerns, trends, and innovations. Recognizing the inherent strengths of the private schools in achieving excellence in Philippine education, the PEAC is committed to promoting private education as an integral part of our educational system.
Greetings of peace. Assalamualaikum. For the Catholics, we begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear God, ever mighty, ever loving, ever merciful, at this time when the world is gripped with fear, with uncertainty, with struggle, may we be reminded that you are in control, that you are making our world better in ways we could not fully comprehend, that you hold us in the palm of your hands, strengthening us, our trust in you amidst our fear, surrendering to your power amidst our uncertainties, consoling us with your peace amidst our struggles, clarifying our mission and service amidst our confusion, giving us comfort amidst our anxieties. We pray for our leaders and our people, especially those who are poor, forgotten, and hungry. We pray for the mission you entrusted to us at PEAC, at CAAP, in our schools and universities, so we can listen to your call, so we can follow your will, so we can discern your directions in the service of our country for your greater glory. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Bayang magiliw, perlas ng silanganan, hanap ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Upang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupig, di ka pasisiil, sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bughaw, may dilag ang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagniningning, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng luwalhatit pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Good morning. The Private Education Assistance Committee, PEAC, and the Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines, CAP, particularly the National Advocacy Commission, are happy to welcome you, educators and leaders, to LIDER 2, Leadership Innovations Dynamism Towards Educational Reforms, the PEAC Educational Leadership Series, on its second edition. Both PEAC and CAP share a common vision and mission of transformative education, an education that produces students and graduates who are formed by values and ready to commit to helping transform our society and our world to be better in peace, in development, in social justice, in serving the common good. Integral to this vision of transformative education is an appreciation of history. History makes us understand where we are now and where we want to be. For example, as we grapple with the tremendous and tumultuous challenges of the current pandemic, as well as the several natural and man-made calamities, we can look back and appreciate how our leaders and our people in the past have confronted crisis with conviction, with competence, with compassion. But This valuable imperative to learn from history is now threatened by forces whose preoccupation is to distort history towards preservation of self-serving authoritarian power. This violates our morality, our decency, our democracy, our truth. And thus, this needs to be fought, and we need to struggle against it. Our webinar this morning, entitled Combating Historical Revisionism, addresses this challenge of fighting for authenticity of history as an imperative in our education. On a personal note, the three of us, Ms. Doris Ferrer, PEAC Executive Director, and our guest speaker, Professor John Nery, lived and led as contemporaries in the mid to late 1980s as the country struggled against the atrocities of the Marcos dictatorship. We were student leaders in our respective universities, and we participated in the student and people's movements that led to the downfall of the dictatorship and the restoration of democracy in our country. We shared a common spirit, passion, and narrative of serving the common good. More than 3 decades later, we continue to work for change through our respective professions and involvements. John Nery and I were contemporaries in the Ateneo, and since then, through his work as journalist, social and political analyst, advocate, scholar, lover of history, activist, and patriot, he has continued to inspire us. I am certain that through his sharing this morning, he will deepen our understanding of historical revisionism and move us to action and towards greater love for our country. Thank you, John. Thank you, Doris and PEAC, for conceiving this wonderful and necessary event. Let us have an enlightening and enjoyable morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Karel San Juan, President of Ateneo de Zamboanga University, Program Director for PAC Region 9, and Chair of the CAP National Advocacy Commission, for leading the prayer and for the opening remarks. Very convincing, very passionate, and actually, makes us all realize how significant this morning's webinar is. I also would like to acknowledge Mr. Arman Ferrer for his rendition of the Philippine National Anthem. Arman is a multi-awarded musical theater performer, best known for originating the role of Emilio Aguinaldo in Tanghalang Pilipino's Mabining Mandirigma. We're very happy to welcome all of you to LIDER 2, but by way of recalling, we started in July, Leadership, Innovation, and Dynamism Towards Educational Reforms, or LIDER, when we featured 5 of our most respected academicians in topics that at that time we felt were crucial as we all were navigating COVID-19. But this is not exactly a reactive approach or a reactive response of PAC. Rather, we feel that we were proactive in trying to emphasize the work of ensuring that we future-proof our schools. We are uncompromising in our quality, even while we were in a pandemic, that fiscal discipline should be exercised in the time of COVID-19. And importantly, we'd like to continue the work of educating the conscience. Thus today, we actually are on day 2 of LIDER 2, and we have adopted the theme, Educating for Social Transformation in the 21st Century. The work of social transformation continues. And we know, as a matter of fact, that educational institutions are in a good position to become seedbeds of social transformation. However, they must reimagine their roles and adopt their approaches to this transformative power based on the context they find themselves in. So yesterday, we started with LIDER 2, and we featured Attorney Chel Diokno, who talked about the human rights agenda. Today, we have a discussion on historical revisionism, and tomorrow, we'd like to invite you for a webinar on social media as a force for good. But for today, we are very, very privileged, as what Father Carol has said, that we have with us Mr. John Nery, and we'd like really a discussion about historical revisionism, biases aside. We know that our common history should be built on truth and enduring facts, and this should be produced by scholars of history. And so, as educational institutions, how do we become stewards of history? And how do we equip students in order for us to ensure that historical revisionism is one that does not actually mean denialism? So to add to the introduction that was made by Father Carol, I'd like to present to you, this morning with a lot of pride and privilege, Mr. John Nery, a journalist in the Philippines. He is an opinion columnist at the Philippine Daily Inquirer, board chair of the Asian Center for Journalism at the Ateneo de Manila University, and the convener of the Consortium on Democracy and Disinformation, a nationwide network of journalists, academics, and civil society representatives. He also serves on the board of directors of the Washington, D.C.-based World Justice Project. He served as a senior editor at the Inquirer, the largest newspaper in the Philippines from 2001 to 2018. From August 2014 to May 2017, he acted in a concurrent capacity as editor-in-chief of Inquirer.net, one of the country's leading websites. He led a team that doubled the website's audience in that span. He represented the Inquirer on the executive board of the Asian News Network from 2014 to 2018. His work has received national and international recognition, including a Catholic Mass Media Award for Investigative Reporting in 2002, a National Book Award for Journalism in 2003, a Jefferson Fellowship at the East-West Center in Honolulu in 2005, a Visiting Research Fellowship at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies in Singapore in 2009, a Nieman Fellowship in Journalism at Harvard University in 2011, the Jaime V. Ongpin Memorial Lectureship in 2013, a Freedom Flame Award from the Friedrich Naumann Foundation in 2019, and the Award for Excellence in Opinion Writing from the Society of Publishers in Asia in the Regional Newspaper category in 2020. He is the author of Revolutionary Spirit, Jose Rizal in Southeast Asia, published by ISEAS in Singapore and by the Ateneo de Manila University Press in the Philippines. He has been writing his newsstand column for the Inquirer since 2007. Therefore, the introduction was, I think, befitting of all the accomplishments of our very, very esteemed guest this morning. But we'll be very happy to hear from Mr. John Nery on our topic on historical revisionism. Mga kaibigan, mga kasama sa PEAC, Mr. John Nery.
Good morning. Good morning and thank you, especially to Father Carol and to Executive Director Doris. I am honored to take part in the PEAC Educational Leadership Series. My role, as I see it, is to define historical revisionism, to describe the conditions that allow it to take root, and to determine ways to fight it. I am not a historian, although I have studied Rizal closely and have written on the role he played in fostering nationalism in Southeast Asia. I'm only a journalist and a teacher, and my perspective is necessarily that of a practitioner in two disciplines deeply affected by the phenomenon of disinformation. Let me begin with a specific example of a simple error. I prepared a speech that runs for about 45 or 50 minutes. I beg your indulgence. I also prepared a deck of slides with about 16 slides in all. This is the first. So let me begin with a specific example of a simple error. Last week, while searching for something I needed in a workshop I was about to conduct, I stumbled upon what I thought was an unusual passage in a Rizal translation. In the 2007 edition of Political and Historical Writings by Rizal, we find his Tagalog translation of the Declaration of the Right of Man and the Citizen, the towering document of the French Revolution, translated into English by the wonderful but woefully overworked Encarnacion Alzona. Alzona rendered Article 11 this way: the freedom of thought and expression constitutes one of the most precious rights of man. Therefore, every citizen can freely express, write, and communicate his thoughts and be responsible for abuses he may commit in the exercise of this freedom according to law. And then she translated Article 12 as follows: the guarantee of the human rights requires the formation of a strong public opinion. This stopped me because I teach a course on media and politics, and the formation of public opinion is one of the course's main obsessions. Did the historic 1789 Declaration really call for the formation of a strong public opinion? And did Rizal respond to this call? I looked for the original French, which, as it turns out, remains a part of the current Constitution of France. I will not inflict my lack of French on you. I will only show you Articles 11 and 12 in the original. Now, the official English translation of these two articles, approved by the French government, reads as follows. Article 11, the free communication of ideas and of opinions is one of the most precious rights of man. Any citizen may therefore speak, write, and publish freely, except what is tantamount to the abuse of this liberty in the cases determined by law. And Article 12 reads, to guarantee the rights of man and of the citizen, a public force is necessary. This force is therefore established for the benefit of all, and not for the particular use of those to whom it is entrusted. In case the meaning of a public force is still unclear, here is the English translation of Article 12 in the popular open book that circulated widely in 2016, entitled Tolerance, the Beacon of the Enlightenment. And in its translation, Article 12 reads, the safeguard of the rights of man and of the citizen requires public military forces. These forces are thus established for the good of all and not for the personal advantage of those to whom they shall be entrusted. As we can see, Article 12 is about establishing an armed force that will serve as a guarantor of these very rights. It is emphatically not about forming a strong public opinion. Did Rizal get it wrong? This is how he translated the French into Tagalog. And I acknowledge Professor Francis Dialogo. I sourced Rizal's Tagalog version from his column in Bulatlat, which he in turn sourced from Professor Nilo Ocampo. Article 11 reads, isa sa mga mahalagang karampatan ng tao ay ang malayang pagpapahayag ng sariling isip o panukala. Sa makatwid, bagay masasabi, masusulat, maipalilimbag na paanyo ang anuman, pananagutan lamang ang mapakalabis sa mga tinadhanaan ng kautusan. And Article 12 reads, upang mapagtibay ang mga karampatang ito'y, kinakailangan ng isang hayag na lakas o tanggulan ng bayan. Note that Rizal did not include the safety provisions in Article 12 about the public force being established for the good of all and about its trustees not misusing the force for personal advantage. But he did translate the main clause accurately. A public force as isang hayag na lakas, and even added a phrase of his own, tanggulan ng bayan, or the defenders of the people. There is nothing in Article 12, neither in Rizal's Tagalog translation, nor in the French original, to even suggest a reference to public opinion. It seems clear then that the hardworking Alzona made a mistake. And the reason I included Article 11 in the discussion is to raise the possibility that Alzona made the mistake because under the press of time, her reading of Article 11 on the freedom of thought and expression may have colored her translation of Article 12 on the supposed formation of public opinion. Is all this historical revisionism? In fulfilling the charge given to us today to consider the ways we can combat historical revisionism, we should first define what it is. In mistranslating Rizal's Article 12, did Alzona revise history? In translating only the main clause in Article 12 and in adding a new thought to it, did Rizal engage in an act of historical revisionism? In pointing out Alzona's translation error, are we acting like revisionists? If by the term we mean negative historical revisionism, then the short answer to all three questions is no. If by the term we mean positive revisionism, then the answer is yes. The distinction is important. From my perspective, positive historical revisionism involves three different types of change. First is the correction. Whenever the historical record is reviewed, whether the review is prompted by new scholarship or plain serendipity, errors will inevitably surface or become visible. Correcting the errors, such as changing Alzona's English translation of Rizal's Article 12 to reflect its true meaning, is a positive revision. It brings the historical record closer to the truth as we know it. Second is the contextualization. History is not only detail, but background. Not only facts, but context. Providing or updating the context brings the historical record closer to the truth as we know it, and is a positive revision. To cite a small instance, the 1976 edition of Rizal's Political and Historical Writings does not carry the name of the translator, but the 2007 edition does, and the addition of Alzona's name is a modest but called for change in context. Third is the construction, by which I mean interpretation. History is not necessarily written by the victors, as scholars like William Henry Scott have taught us. But history is necessarily told from specific perspectives. New research or new thinking may improve a previous interpretation or widen the perspective from which it is written. In that way, reconstruing the historical record brings it closer to the truth as we know it. In my revolutionary spirit, Jose Rizal in Southeast Asia, I suggested a framework with which to understand the most common types of error in Rizal studies. Perhaps, with your indulgence, we can apply that framework here. Let me start with the unfortunate error, the type that concerns merely factual imprecision. Alzona's mistake in translating Article 12 as being about the formation of public opinion, rather than being about the creation of an armed force, falls under this category. Fixing this mistake only requires the first kind of positive revision, a correction of the factual error. The instructive error may throw unexpected light on some aspect under study. Alzona's error leads us to read Rizal's Tagalog translation again. But I think it is genuinely puzzling that Rizal translated only half of Article 12. This puzzle is new to me, only a week old. I do not have any answers. But I think it is important to note the possibility that Rizal's erasure of the second half of Article 12 can lead to new understanding. Fixing this mistake requires the second kind of positive revision, a contextualization. The pernicious error is a gross misinterpretation. In the book, I was referring to the fundamentally flawed premises from which Rizal's biographers proceeded. Austin Craig, for example, believed Rizal was a proto-American. Miguel de Unamuno thought Rizal was an impractical dreamer. At a very basic level, they misunderstood Rizal. Fixing a mistake like this requires the third and most difficult kind of positive revision, construction or reinterpretation. Correction, contextualization, construction. All these positive revisions become possible because of new research, new discoveries or breakthroughs, new or updated thinking. We call these changes, these revisions, positive historical revisionism because they are an exercise in getting closer to the truth. The journalist Carl Bernstein of Watergate fame uses a phrase which I have borrowed again and again because it sums up what journalists pursue. The goal of journalism, he said, is to get, and I quote, the best obtainable version of the truth. I think historians have the same goal, but with more finely tuned tools, a more comprehensive view or review of related literature, deeper research, and longer timetables. Truth is obtainable, but the word obtain suggests a humbling struggle, a grasping after, a perpetual chase. And the errors these positive revisions can fix have something basic in common: the absence of malice. When Alzona mistranslated Article 12, or when Rizal translated only the first half of it and added his own description, they did not do so to mislead the individual reader or the public at large. They made what we commonly call honest mistakes. There was no intent to deceive. What we call negative historical revisionism, on the other hand, is based entirely on the intent to deceive, to mislead, to cause harm. It is stained right through with the color of malice. In that sense, negative historical revisionism is disinformation. It is not an exercise in seeking and telling the best obtainable version of the truth. Rather, it is an attempt to defend power. Here, for instance, is a straightforward example of power defending, justifying itself. US President William McKinley is speaking, and I will only go to the highlights. I walked the door of the White House night after night until midnight. And I'm not ashamed to tell you, gentlemen, that I went down on my knees and prayed Almighty God for light and guidance more than one night. And one night late, it came to me this way: there was nothing left for us to do but to take them all and to educate the Filipinos and uplift and civilize and Christianize them. And by God's grace, do the very best we could by them as our fellow men for whom Christ also died. Christianize the 6 million Filipinos then, when most had already been baptized into the Catholic Church. This is not a seeking after truth, but rather a defense, a rationalization of the strategic, political, and military objectives already filling McKinley's mind. I share the view of some historians that the better term for negative historical revisionism is historical denialism. Denialism is not a mere alternative reading of reality. Rather, it is a reading of an alternative reality. It denies history as it happened and proposes a counterfactual history. What are the conditions which allow historical denialism to take root in the Philippines? In 2015, that is to say, before Rodrigo Duterte became president and before Ferdinand Marcos Jr. almost became vice president, I identified 5 factors that enabled Marcosian distortions of history. Why is it that some Filipinos, not only those who are too young, but even those old enough to have lived through the Marcos years, seem ready to buy into this counterfactual version of history, I asked. Many factors must be at work. The loss of perspective, the failure of education, the power of myth, the relativism of protest, not least the lure of innocence. We can group these 5 factors under a common label. We can call them historical, cultural, or systemic conditions. Let me go through them one by one. The loss of perspective is a function of time. In less than 2 years, we will be marking the 50th anniversary of Marcos's imposition of martial rule. That is a long time by the measure of human memory. How many of the 40 million Filipinos living in 1972 are still around today? The failure of education. It is difficult to justify sweeping statements about the quality of Philippine education. But perhaps the following assertion is non-controversial. Successive generations were taught that the Marcos regime was like any other administration, but with some excesses. If these were discussed, these excesses would be compared to those of other administrations. Marcos's government was as centralized as Quezon's, say, or as corrupt as Quirino's. But the right approach should have been to treat the Marcos years like the Japanese occupation, an aberration in history, a self-occupation. The relativism of protest. The fatal uniqueness of the Marcos regime becomes harder to see because of the lack of contrast with other administrations. In part because the protests that have criticized each succeeding administration use largely the same terminology. Every president since Marcos has been denounced on the streets as a dictator. Aquino, Ramos, Estrada, Arroyo, Aquino again, Duterte. The overuse cheapens the language and blurs the distinctions. The lure of innocence. I guess I could have chosen a more direct term, but in using this phrase, I only meant to say that the media industry is structurally designed to pursue the latest, the newest stories, especially stories of iniquity and inequality. The bias is for the new. That means that on a system level, many of the older stories of investigations and controversies wither on the vine for lack of attention. The failure to follow up consistently, comprehensively, as a matter of course, is one of the greatest failings of the media as a profession. That leaves the power of myth as the 5th factor. On reflection, we can see that this is actually 2 conditions in one. The first aspect of power of myth is focused on myth. Our national culture rewards simplified narratives. Even, for instance, in acknowledged masterpieces such as the movie General Luna, of one against many, of country before self, of nation above class, of good versus evil. From our historical experience, we know that the figure of the man on horseback is a powerful narrative. The figure of the compassionate widow is a potent symbol. But other than historical, cultural, and systemic conditions, we must also reckon with the infrastructure of information as a relatively new and absolutely game-changing condition. The second aspect of the power of myth, then, is focused precisely on power. That power, for the most part, is driven by information technology. The Marcoses have gained a firm foothold in YouTube, for instance, because they seeded it with visions and versions of its own alternative reality, even before it became a massively popular platform. I do not want to preempt the presentation of scholars Miguel Paulo Reyes and Joel Fajardo Ariate Jr. of the University of the Philippines at next week's Where's the Lie Research Forum. And here I plug our activity on Wednesday, December 9. But their study of the Marcos truths, tracing what they call a genealogy of historical distortions, helps explain how power meets myth. How do these narratives circulate? How do they become part of public opinion? The journalist Walter Lippmann, writing in 1927 in The Phantom Public, has an answer. The making of one general will out of a multitude of general wishes is not a Hegelian mystery, but an art well known to leaders, politicians, and steering committees. It consists essentially in the use of symbols which assemble emotions after they have been detached from their ideas. The process, therefore, by which general opinions are brought to cooperation consists of an intensification of feeling and a degradation of significance. It is worth repeating Lippmann's foundational insights into the formation of public opinion. Use symbols to assemble emotions after these emotions have been detached from their ideas. And, even more important, general opinions are brought to wide circulation through an intensification of feeling and a degradation of significance. Consider the following image from this extraordinary collection called Cartoons of the Spanish-American War, published in 1899, featuring the work of the cartoonist Charles Louis Bartholomew, or Bart, for the Minneapolis Journal. The caption of this cartoon reads, "The boys of 76 and 61 pass on old glory to the boys of 98. The cartoon illustrates a very simple idea. The soldiers of the American Revolution of 1776 and the soldiers of the American Civil War that started in 1861 are passing on the American flag to the soldiers of the Spanish-American War in 1898. Simple, but also deceptive and highly manipulative. The cartoon equates the American War of Independence, establishing a new nation, and the US Civil War, defending that nation from secession, with American empire building. But starting with the Spanish-American War of 1898, those wars are in fact incompatible with the founding principles of the American nation. But this is what Lippmann means. Intensify the feeling, so beat the military drums, evoke national victory, use old glory, the flag, intensify the feeling, and then degrade the significance by detaching the emotions assembled, for instance, patriotic fervor, from their ideas. In this case, patriotism to build and defend a nation. Intensification of feeling and degradation of significance. That sounds like a summary of what most memes are today. How then do we combat historical denialism? I am taking up so much time, so I will simply suggest 4 next steps and hope we can discuss them in detail during the Q&A. Oh, I forgot. Here's another example. So this is from my title card of intensified feelings and degradation of significance. This is an 1899 cartoon showing Emilio Aguinaldo, the most famous Filipino in the world at the time, acting like a little boy, and Uncle Sam calling out the little boy, saying, "What are you going to throw those stones for, Sonny?" So there is this paternalism that is the message of this image. Detach the emotions from the ideas, intensify the feeling, degrade the significance. But I was talking about 4 next steps that we can discuss in detail during the Q&A. First, and this is what we have tried to do in the last half hour or so, we need to define the problem, to know the enemy. To combat something means to be at war. I apologize for the war metaphor, but that, in fact, is what we are in now. Second, we need to consolidate our ranks. Third, we need to build both bridges and support structures. And fourth, we need to go on the attack. We need to attack the enemy. We need to be assertive to go on the offensive. To close, let us talk about the end. What is the purpose of combating historical denialism? Why does it matter at all? Let me build on what Dean Chel Jokno said yesterday in his discussion on human rights, in his discussion of human rights. What is at stake, he said, is the dignity of the human person. Because historical denialism attacks reality itself. It attacks the integrity of the human community. We only connect because we share a common reality based on actual fact and a shared understanding of the truth. An assembly of persons, a network, connected to each other through lies, alternative facts, false information, is still a gathering of human persons, but it is less a community than a mob, less a democratic assembly than an audience vulnerable to authoritarianism. In truth, what is at stake is the integrity of our national community. Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Mr. John Nery. Magkakaroon tayo ng Q&A ngayon. No? We're trying to collect some of the questions coming from our attendees. Siguro, just for everyone's peace of mind, there is a video recording of this webinar because I'm sure what has been shared to us is something that you'd like to review. I suppose take screenshots of kasi medyo marami, malalim yung content na na-discuss sa atin this morning. Siguro, just to start the Q&A, I was wondering earlier if the correct title would have been Combating Historical Denialism. Kasi can we use interchangeably revisionism and denialism? Or is it correct to say negative historical revisionism, yun ang denialism?
Yes, the second part. I've learned from historians that revisionism, that revision of the historical record is in fact necessary. It is the object of scholarship. The more we know about Rizal, the fuller our picture is of Rizal, for instance. That means we need to revise some of our own previous interpretations of Rizal. So revisionism is, in that sense, is positive. But there is a very strong, very widespread use of revisionism to mean the negative kind. You deny, you change history because you don't like it. You change the facts because those facts are not convenient to you. And that is the kind of revisionism that we should be on guard against. From our, I helped organize a forum last September called Balik Kasaysayan. And one of our main takeaways was that we should embrace the language of the phrase historical denialism. That is a shorter way of saying negative historical revisionism. And also that is a more powerful way of summarizing what is at stake. Because what is really involved here in this information in history is not so much to revise previous history, but to create a new one, to create an alternative reality. And you can only create an alternative reality if you deny present reality. So I would recommend that we start using, like other historians have started using, the phrase historical denialism. It means negative historical revisionism, but at the same time, it brings something else to the discussion. It tells us that at the very heart of disinformation in history is a denial of the reality that we share.
Dun sa discussion ninyo, it is apparent na hindi naman ito ngayon lamang, no? Pero bakit parang in Philippine society, this is so pronounced at this time that it has, spawned a lot of discussion. In fact, mainit, no? Pag pinag-usapan ng historical revisionism, merong mga negative reactions kaagad about this topic. When in fact, based on your presentation, matagal na, no? Na may ganito. It could be possibly an absence of malice, no, in the errors that were committed, but it has been there all this time. Pero ngayon, medyo mainit siya.
Yes, definitely. I think that historical denialism is as old as history itself. Sometimes the losers try to create their own version of history. Sometimes the winners try to embellish their victories. So denialism is as old as history itself, I would think. Why is it particularly widespread today? The first answer there, it's not only in the Philippines. You can see that, for instance, in the United States right now, what is going on. Joe Biden has received the most number of votes of any American presidential candidate, over 80 million votes. And yet, something like 47% of Americans do not believe, or rather 47% of Americans who voted in the 2020 elections do not believe that the victory and those 80 million votes are legitimate. So they are, right this moment, constructing an alternative history. So it's not just in the Philippines. Part of the reason why it's become widespread around the world is, I would say, economic conditions, right? I would classify the platforms like Facebook, like YouTube, and the other social media platforms as actually economic factors. No? Many of us are able to access this, and because we are able to access this, we are able to publish our own opinions at the speed of, well, practically at the speed of light. No? But this also means that we are vulnerable to all sorts of disinformation going around, right? So it's a two-way street. We might be able to use Facebook for constructive purposes like this particular forum. We are on Facebook Live. But it's also very possible that Facebook Live can be used by another group to fabricate a new reality. So that's one important factor why it is so prevalent today. Economic conditions have led to the thriving of social media platforms like Facebook and YouTube. And that affects billions of people around the world. In the Philippines, there is an additional condition, and that I would say that is the historical condition. President Duterte, while he ran with Alan Cayetano as his vice presidential candidate, was very friendly with Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who almost won the vice presidency. In fact, in Davao, which I visited before the elections, there was much more, there are many more signs of Duterte Marcos than Duterte Cayetano. To be completely fair to the president, Davao and the Davao regions, Region 11, was the only region where Cayetano won as vice president. That means that really the Duterte family and their coalition pushed for Cayetano in that particular region. But because Duterte has been very friendly with Marcos, Marcos almost won, and Duterte has allowed the burial of the remains of Bongbong Marcos's father in the National Cemetery for Heroes, the issue is top of mind now. We are grappling with a very tangible issue. Should we honor Marcos? How should we treat his 20 years in power? And it's part of the historical condition that President Duterte is making the case for Marcos. That's partly the reason why there's all this disinformation.
Yeah, I'd like to, well, agree to several of the things you said. No? Kasi during that time, yung PEAC kasi dahil umiikot din kami sa mga rehiyon, talagang marami kaming nakikita na campaign paraphernalia na it was a Duterte Marcos that was already being carried in some regions in the Philippines. And also that the Ferdinand Marcos dictatorship is really a major focal point in Philippine history. At doon tayo mapupunta doon sa sinabi ninyo kanina na failure of education. That's why nakaka-thrive in effect itong creation of an alternative reality or negative revisionism is because there is failure in our education system.
I'm afraid the answer is yes. And speaking as a teacher myself, on and off over the last couple of decades, the one that I pointed to in my prepared remarks was about our failure to properly classify the Marcos years, or at least the years from 1972 to 1986. There is a tendency to say, okay, there were abuses of human rights, there was plunder during the Marcos years, but the Marcos years, the Marcos administration is just like any other administration, okay? Partly that's because as a people, we are very forgiving. Partly because we need to grow a sense of history. We lack historical consciousness. And we cannot appreciate that what Marcos did was actually to kill democracy in the Philippines. And the historical record is there. His own diaries record that starting in 1969, he was already preparing the plot to take over Philippine democracy. So we cannot, as a people, see this administration as just like any other, right? It's like, oh, parang kay Erap, parang kay Gloria, parang kay Cory, parang kay Noynoy. It cannot be, because none of those other presidents ever considered killing Philippine democracy. So my analogy to the Marcos administration is, it was like the Japanese occupation. Well, we were led by a statesman, Jose P. Laurel, who rehabilitated himself after World War II. But the reality is the Japanese occupation was not good for the Philippines. It was an aberration in our history. And I think that's the way we should look at it. So the failure to treat the Marcos years as an aberration is the failure that I'm referring to when we talk about the failure of education.
May katanungan dito, konektado,
Sure.
coming from Alan Sorion, who is from the PEAC, at ito ay isang hands-on na father, He's asking, can you please cite specific non-biased resources on the martial law era which teachers and parents can use? Kasi pag tinignan mo nga naman yung mga textbooks natin, parang wala namang problema yung Marcos years, In fact, some even say it's the golden age nga of the Philippines.
Yes. Okay, before I answer that, let's take a little trip down memory lane. In 1992, Imelda Marcos ran for president. She did not win. I think she only got around 3-something million votes. 3 years later, in 1995, Bongbong Marcos ran for the Senate. He lost badly. All right. Part of the reason for that was that the memory of EDSA was still very fresh. And another reason is there was no Facebook or YouTube then. But very, very patiently, the Marcos family, as I said in my remarks, seeded YouTube especially with visions and versions of an alternative reality. Fast forward to 2010. The second time Bongbong Marcos ran for the Senate, he won handily. What happened in those 15 years between 1995 and 2010? The internet happened. So that's part of the reality. The fact that the internet happened in those 15 years has obscured what really are clear historical records. Thank you, Alan, for your question, but I hope you don't mind if I tell you that this is not the first time I've received that exact kind of question. Many people from the Ilocos ask, what are your non-biased sources? The first sources are Marcos's own documents. I mentioned the presidential diaries. I mentioned the presidential diaries. I will mention the documentation regarding their Swiss bank accounts. If they do not own those Swiss bank accounts, why are they defending up to now those bank accounts? There is a paper trail. That's one. That's two. A third non-biased source is that the same Supreme Court that has granted Marcos's remains the permission to be buried in the Libingan ng Mabayani is the same Supreme Court that found Marcos guilty of human rights atrocities. So it's not only in the law, the law is defended by Supreme Court decisions saying that there were tens of thousands of activists, ordinary citizens, abused during those Marcos years. So we can actually start with, I'm looking for the right term. We can actually start with the primary sources. I would strongly recommend that you watch our program next week, Where's the Lie? Because in the presentation of the Marcos Truths, we will find out where exactly the Marcos family's own sources lie. And we will trace this trajectory of lies. So I will start with the primary sources. You can look at all those. There is a very important book called The Conjugal Dictatorship. Why is this important? It was written by
Primary source.
Primitivo Mijares, who was for a time Marcos's right-hand man for the media. In fact, he describes himself in that book, published in the mid-1970s before he was killed, that he was responsible for many of the things that happened with the Press and Media Council. He even before martial law was declared, Mijares says, I already received the reports of the orders, the general orders and the military orders that would implement martial rule. And yet, at a certain point, his conscience couldn't take it anymore, and he turned around and he pointed to Marcos and especially Imelda as having distorted history itself. That would be a very good source. Maybe I'll stop there.
Yeah. Ito additional na continuation, no? Kasi Cecil Con, one of our viewers now, I suppose teacher siya. Is it really accurate teaching if we were supposed to present a supposedly balanced view of the dictatorship? Kasi parang yun ang criticism, no? Dapat daw balanced view of the dictatorship ang ipe-present when one
is it Caroline? What did you say? What's her name?
Balanced. A balanced.
No, the name of the questioner.
Cecil.
Sorry. Cecil, again, I hope you don't take it wrongly, but I would like to ask you, what is the balanced view of the Japanese occupation? Is there anyone in the Philippines who will say it was good for the Filipinos? it is possible to outline everything that, that the Japanese did as making the Philippines the first independent republic under the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. But overall, we come to a judgment. So the idea of balance is actually the false concept, no? That, okay, because what, Marcos is Filipino, we have to look at the right and the wrong. Of course, we do the good and the bad. We weigh the good and the bad. But precisely because we've studied the matter, you and I, it is incumbent on us to reach a judgment. And we must judge the Marcos years as a whole. Sorry, Doris, you look like you were expecting more from me.
No.
I think that's what's up,
Comments, and everyone is saying, you know, a lot to ponder on. Ang daming napapaisip, no, dito sa discussion natin. Pero siguro babalikan ko yung something that I caught, no? Intensification of feelings and degradation of significance.
Yeah.
Kaya nagsastrive din, no, yung mga ganitong klaseng creation of a myth or revising or denying or getting people on their side, no, even if all the evidences show that talagang it has been very there was a lot of injustice, no, that was on the Filipino people. It is that intensification of feelings, no? Parang medyo hindi kaya magaling sila doon, and in effect it degrades the significance.
I'm glad that you brought the discussion back to that point. Walter Lippmann was a very influential American newspaperman who wrote a couple of books on public opinion and helped shape modern day journalism as we understand it today. And I find his view of public opinion, the formation of public opinion, as almost bordering on the cynical, no? Although he would just say he is just being realistic. And his point really is that something becomes public opinion because our emotions have been stoked and we're not being asked to think deeply on it. Okay, fast forward almost 100 years, and now we're talking about memes. You might say that intensification of feelings and degradation of significance is the memification of public opinion,
Yeah.
right? I don't wanna. I was going to give another example about Marcos, but maybe I'll give another example. No? So in Donald Trump's America, you can boil everything down to one word. In fact, 4 words, but summarized as one: MAGA, Make America Great Again, right? So Trumpists would call themselves citizens of Trump land, of MAGA land rather, and so on. The point is that MAGA itself, Make America Great Again, is already like a meme in the sense that we can apply Lippmann to. There is an intensification of feeling. MAGA is about white anxiety, uncertainty about the future, and degradation of significance. MAGA is code, is shorthand for so many things. Put Hillary in jail, open her emails, finally leave the UN. I mean, it's all of those things. Huh? It's been codified into a very simple symbol. And that symbol is the red cap with MAGA on it, Make America Great Again. That's what I mean when I apply Lippmann and mimification. There you are just intensifying the feelings, and feelings, as we all know, or as we should know, is one of the driving factors of virality. No? A lot of things go viral on social media because they provoke very strong emotions in us, right? There are other emotions that provoke a feeling, but they're not gonna make content go viral. For instance, leisure, contentment, But there are other emotions such as anger, outrage, hatred. They travel very well, right? So that's one concrete application of the idea of intensification of feelings. We really need to be very careful of this. In fact, I've come to the point where I argue that critical thinking alone is not enough. When we say critical thinking, okay, we can distinguish forms of this information by being critically minded. No, we know different biases. What are the different heuristic cognitive biases? That's important. But I think even more important than that is what I can call, for lack of a better term, critical feeling. Okay, many of the much of the disinformation content that's out there does not appeal to our intellect. It appeals to our instinct. And if we are not critical feelers, to quote, coin a phrase, we might be vulnerable to the emotions that they want to provoke. We get angry, even if we don't know the person online, right? We get outraged. I mean, look at that student from, was it Bacolod? Who, out of the blue, just, did this terrible, gross sexual joke involving the president and the vice president. And now he is sorry for it. I am sure that if he had been critically minded, he would have said, okay, I'm not going to do that. But even if he had been critically minded, if he did not know how to control his emotions, then he would have succumbed. And I think that's what happened. Now he realizes, oh my God, this is a stain on the reputation of my family. Nakakahiya naman, right? But in the heat of the moment, galit lang siya. Galit lang siya. And when you're galit, when you're full of hate, you reduce the person into just an object, right? So for that person, he doesn't really see the vice president as a person. No? He just objectified her. Now, of course, as they say, nasa huli ang pagsisisi. So anyway, that's just an example. I'm glad you brought that up. Intensification of feeling and degradation of significance. So degradation, now I just want to say, what I understand that to mean is that it minimizes reasoned discourse. Okay? I mean, when you go to war, you're not going to hold a meeting with your platoon and say, so what do you think? Why should we go against the enemy? What are your preferred strategies? It doesn't work that way, right? When you're in war, I mean, you need to not think about certain things. You just need to act or react, right? So it's the same thing. You are being forced into a fight or flight position by stoking your emotions and deadening your reasoning ability.
Yeah. That is striking, no? What goes viral are those which are full of hatred and, hindi viral ang joy and contentment. So baka that is a strategy that has been obvious. That's why it's been utilized, no? Now, what
Yeah.
goes viral is what actually spawns a lot of hatred, a lot of...
There is a scholar by the name of Jonah Berger, or Berger, B-E-R-G-E-R. He wrote a book called Contagious. And in that book, he suggests 6 drivers of virality. He called it STEPS, S-T-E-P-P-S. So 2 S's and 2 P's, no? S-T-E-P-P-S. I'm not sure if I can list them off one by one. But for me, the most important is the E there. The most E, which is emotion. One of the 6 drivers, and I think the most important driver of virality, is emotion. The first S is social currency. We share something because it's like we're saying, hey, look at us, we're cool, or we're hot, right? We're trendy. No? That's a lot. that a lot of that kind of behavior explains what happens with viral content. But I think the most important driver really is the emotions.
This is a follow-up question. I think this is another teacher, no, Miss Sally Nolasco Santos. How could it become? How can we have balance, no, in teaching history when we also have our own biases and feelings and, I suppose, prejudices as a teacher? So how does a teacher rise up to, rise above his
I
or
think
her
that
own biases?
I think that in fact, as teachers, we already know the answer to that question, and that is our bias should be for the truth. That should be the determining factor. Uh, unless I'm a power player in the classroom, my main objective should be to teach my students how to think and to apply the lessons to real life, right? And I cannot do that if I am hesitant to embrace the truth. If we're talking about the Marcoses, some of the truths of the Marcoses are right there in our faces. And yet we hesitate to embrace them. Why? Kasi Filipino din tayo. We're a very forgiving people. But the truth is staring in us in our faces. Should we tell our students, okay, alam mo, maraming nagawa si Marcos. Marami rin siyang pinatay. Okay? He is listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as one of the world's greatest plunderers. He set back the Philippines by maybe 30 years economically, pero marami rin siyang nagawa. Is that the kind of balance that we want? Is that what we're looking for in a president? I don't think so. And I think that in our own spaces, we already know the answer. The bias is not balance. The bias is for the truth. And balance will take care of itself. That's what I think. We're not the only teachers of our students, and that's a good thing. I believe in pluralism. The more teachers our students have, I think the better for them. It is possible. I know that there are some teachers who actually believe that Marcos was a great president and that the Marcos years were the golden years. And they may, present their alternative facts. Should we ostracize them? I don't think so. I think the way to address that, the way to address the needs of the students is, I think, first of all, to be open about certain controversies, and we say, I stand different. I have a different stand on this than you, but I'm open to discussion. What is the point of an education after all, if not to be able to engage in public reason? So I think that the openness to discuss, I think, is more important, and also the pluralism of having many teachers who are on the same side as history.
I think we already answered the question of Benji, who was saying, how can we refute the testimonies of persons who state that Marcos is really a great man? So I think you gave some answers to that, Benji. I suppose those answers of Sir John Nery would suffice. Pero balikan ko yung sinasabi nyo na we are a forgiving people. Parang hindi na yata masyadong positive yung we're very forgiving and Pilipino naman kasi siya, so kailangan mas siguro unawain natin. Baka tatay naman natin siya, so kahit na medyo may mga mali. What can you say about this? Is it really something very Filipino that we're forgiving to a fault?
That's a great question, and now I'm forced to think back and ask myself, when did I first think of that? I believe that. I believe that we are too forgiving. But your question prompts me to ask myself, where do I root that belief? How did it all get started? I think that there are many examples. I think that, for instance, politically, there are many redemption stories in the Philippines. So we ousted a president for plunder and corruption. But Joseph Estrada, after a few years, was able to run again for president, even though I would think a literal reading of the Constitution prevented him from doing that. And then eventually winning a couple of elections as mayor of Manila. Do I begrudge him that? I'm not sure, because one of my own, so I'm conflicted about Jose P. Laurel, because I think he was a truly great man. He was, for me, the best writer we ever had on the Supreme Court. His Supreme Court decisions are just a delight to read. And then, of course, he took over as president of the Japanese Puppet Republic. And he did it in order to protect Filipinos. Somebody tried to assassinate him. He was actually wounded while he was playing golf in Wakwak. And he befriended the assassin, who later on became a lifelong friend. And after World War II, he was able to run for the Senate. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was in the top, was among the top winners. My point is that politics offered J.P. Laurel redemption. He was able to rehabilitate his image. The same way as Claro M. Recto did. How many of us remember that Claro M. Recto was the foreign minister of the Japanese Puppet Republic?
Right.
Now we just look at him as a pioneer nationally. If that's the case for J.P. Laurel, should I begrudge ERA for having been rehabilitated in the public mind because of his political victories, or because of the political process? We need to be fair with both, with this redemption arc. But your question has to do with forgiveness. I think it has to do. I think the basic answer has to do with discipline. When Rizal was writing, he was already talking about the need for the moral education of his people. He knew that we had not yet matured because we were prevented from maturing during the Spanish years. And he was very fearful that, as he said, today's slaves may be tomorrow's tyrants. And that's exactly what happened in our history. But he was very conscious of that way back in the 19th century. He sensed, I would think that while he loved the Filipino people deeply, I think he sensed a kind of softness in us. Like we're ready to get along. So we go along in order to get along. You know, that kind of mentality. We might hate somebody in the office, but when we see each other, we share, we make chika and so on. And then when you leave, you say, ay, naku, I hate that person. Let me just end the discussion about Filipino psychology by, of which I'm not an expert, by the way, by referring to the late great Father Ruben Tanseco, who just passed away. Father Tanseco wrote a terrific essay about EDSA 1986. And he said, look at what happened during people power in EDSA. All the worst traits of the Filipinos, mapagkumbaba, mapagtiis, madaling maareglo, and so on, were turned into virtues during people power. Walang mainit na ulo, so walang nagbarilan. No? Mapasensya lahat. So when the tanks were pushing against the nuns and the ordinary citizens, the nuns and the ordinary citizens were willing to be patient, to wait. So yung point niya na maybe God confounds the wise and the foolish, and look at the Filipinos. No? Some of their worst traits can actually be converted into sources of strength. And this is how we can understand people power in EDSA 1986.
Well, that's a good thought, no, to ponder on. At sana yung pagiging forgiving natin, no, will also become our strength, no, moving forward. Pero may tanong pa dito from Leonel naman. Regionalism. The Filipinos are very regionalistic. So it affects their way of viewing the country's history or the narratives. What do you say about that?
Yes, speaking as a Bisaya from Mindanao, I know what you mean. When I was teaching in Xavier University High School in the mid 1980s after college in Cagayan de Oro, I was so distressed when I found out that people look down on Tagalog. No? I had already spent my growing up years in Manila. When I went back to teach, people would say, Tagalog, hilas man, meaning, parang pretentious, how presumptuous of you to speak Tagalog. You either speak Visayan, or English.
Right.
That was the kind of regionalism. But there is also another side to regionalism. I was distressed to find out that my students use Bisaya, meaning native, as a pejorative. Okay? So pag may pumalpak, so this was in 1987, 88, no? Pag may pumalpak, some of my students would say, ay, Bisaya man. And I was like, wait, what are you talking about? We are Visayans. Why are we demeaning ourselves? No? So I think that, yes, regionalism is a reality in the Philippines, but there's more than one side to it. No? I think it's worth further study.
Lilipat ako ngayon, no? Kasi there's this question from a school head, Cecil, no? Sipin. I personally know her, no? She runs a school, St. Alphonsus Liguri, asking about the media. Dun sa topic, dun sa key idea mo of lure of innocence, no? See, the media only discusses those which are current, and then pag matagal na, limot na. But at the same time, I think the comment of Cecil is, don't you think media is too timid now?
Cecil, I agree with you. Again, I don't want to ruffle feathers, but the reality is President Duterte has successfully intimidated many in the media. And he has done that the way he has intimidated other sectors of society by making a sample, an example of one or two. So the business community is intimidated by President Duterte because in 2016, he just suddenly started attacking Phil Webb. He said, I don't like online gaming. So Phil Webb, in a matter of weeks, lost, I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but probably 75% of its equity, the value of their equity on the stock market. And after about 2 weeks, Greggy Araneta, who is married to Irene Marcos, emerged to buy Phil Webb. And after that, the president started saying, I really don't have anything against online gaming. So my point is, because of that example, that sample, up to today, many people in business are intimidated. The president has also made an example in the early years of the Inquirer, of ABS-CBN, of Rappler, also of the smaller independent outfits like Verifiles. He has attacked Ellen Tordesillas vociferously, PCIJ, the alternative media like Bulaklak. But I have to say that I did not expect that the ABS-CBN franchise would not be renewed. I thought that in the end, the political class would consolidate their ranks and say, okay, we need ABS, we have to pass this. But they read the president, and the president did not want the franchise. So yes, Cecil, because of that and other attacks on the media, by and large, is more timid now than it used to be. The element of self-censorship is a pressing reality. Okay, do we run this? If we run this, we might encourage ire. So now this is a real problem because it's not enough for just a handful of news organizations to report things as they see it. Again, even in the media profession, I believe in pluralism. The more news organizations there are, the more TV networks there are to cover the entire country, the better for the profession and the better for the country. Unfortunately, timidity is a reality.
Yeah, okay naman yun, no? Several media organizations, several groups, no? But it's also the quality, I suppose, of these organizations. Kasi isang tanong din ni Cecil kanina was, parang yung itong ganitong discourse, itong ganitong klaseng discussion does not reach majority of the Filipino people. Baka...
Yes. I am very conscious of the fact that we live in a country is many nations, actually. So I write for an English language newspaper. If you put all our media assets together, we reach millions of people. But that's probably just a few, like 2-3% of the entire population of over about 110 million, right? Really, the only news organizations that reached the great majority was ABS-CBN. So this discussion of ours, first of all, I apologize. I speak mostly in English because that's how I trained. Does not reach the majority, right? Even when something that I write goes viral, quote unquote, like I had a column that was read over 100,000 times, and in our business, that's a lot. But when you think about it in terms of the overall market, I mean, who are we kidding, right? But precisely because we are different nations, some of the people that we reach, even if we speak in English, may have an influence on other groupings, other nations within the country, right? So I believe in the idea of the critical few and the critical many, right? So obviously, if you were to stage a revolution, you would need a majority of people, right? The critical many, maybe not a majority, but a large plurality of people. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that the minority don't have a contribution to make. So you have the critical few. They are able to make contributions of their own. I have noticed for a fact that the president reads newspapers. So in many ways, some print journalists actually try to write for that audience of one. Okay? The president is a creature of habits. And ever since he was Davao City Mayor, and he was mayor for 20 plus years, he would always start his day by reading the local and national newspapers. As far as I can tell, based on different sources, that's still his habit today. Kahit galit siya sa Inquirer, kahit galit siya sa mga dyaryo, he still does it. So the hope of some journalists is that somehow you're able to break through to that audience of one. Of course, there are other readers, right? Company CEOs, influencers. It helps that there are different kinds of audiences.
Yeah, that's a very good point, no, that you raised. No, the critical few, the critical many. Pero siguro one last question na lang for this webinar. What you were saying a while ago about not just critical thinking, but critical feeling. Concretely, ano ang gagawin ng mga guro, no, para ito ang ma-develop sa mga estudyante?
So first of all, let's not get rid of critical thinking skills. We all need to learn cognitive biases, right? We all need to know these different heuristics. But on top of that, we also need to develop, for lack of a better term critical feeling skills. If you can suggest a better name, that's great. Now, what would critical feelings, what would critical feeling skills be like? I would suppose this would mean not acting on impulse. That requires training. It requires raising our emotional quotient, right? So, pag galit ba, kailangan bang magsalita kaagad? I had a privilege to give a TEDx talk a few years ago, and I started by saying 95% of my time on social media is spent keeping my mouth shut. I actually start many tweets or Facebook posts, and then when I'm ranting, and then I stop and I delete. Okay, I'm not suggesting that's the best kind of behavior, but that's one possible way to conduct ourselves. No? To not immediately act on our instincts, because this information, whether it's history or otherwise, is calculated to provoke you into acting emotionally, instinctively. I would be very happy to work with some of you, maybe with PAAC. Maybe we can put together a critical feelings skills building workshop.
Oh, that's good.
So we can the title of my TEDx talk was How to Train Your Outrage. Okay, think of it as your inner monster or beast, and you need to be trained. Exactly, anger management, outrage management, emotion management. I'm sure many of the teachers right now in this forum have more experience than me in managing the emotions of hormone-filled teenagers in a classroom. No? That's terrific experience. That's the sort of experience we need to build this critical feelings workshop. We need to train our emotions.
So siguro kasama yun, no? Dun sa ating define the problem, consolidate our ranks, build breaches, and attack. That's part of our attack, right? That we have to be proactive that way.
Yes. By attack, I mean, so there are certain things that we can do. One, if we are privileged to be able to do it, let's call out acts of abuse. When the president makes another rape joke, and you have the privilege to be protected from him, say, President, that's not funny at all. You're talking about rape. Okay, that's one thing. Meaning that's one way we can go on the offensive. Another way we can go on the offensive is we starve the trolls. There are many trolls out there, and they depend on our engagement, literally social media engagement, to earn points so that they can earn their money, right? Block them or mute them. But the better way is to go on the offensive and go on a blocking spree. If you can file a lawsuit. I was one of many journalists who filed a petition in the Supreme Court against the Anti-Terrorism Act because, in our view, it creates a new speech crime, inciting to terrorism. And we were one of, I think, 37 groups of petitioners. We wouldn't do this if times were normal, but times aren't normal. So that's one of the ways we can go on the attack. And yes, train more people to do fact-checking, to do critical thinking, to do critical feeling.
Mukhang marami tayong assignment, no? As teachers ngayong mga panahon nito, because times are not normal. And we're not talking COVID-19 here. So siguro gusto kong i-conclude ito, no, by reading, no, what was sent by Citas Angeles Renente dito sa ating Facebook live while you were speaking. Ang edukasyon ang inaasahang dudurog sa kulturang nagpapahinto sa pagsulong ng ating bansa. Simulan sa pagtuturo ng mga murang edad kung paano mag-isip na hindi para sa sarili lamang, hindi para sa sariling pamilya lamang, pero para sa bansa. Teach them how to be selfless, teach them how to love their country by making them feel that every Filipino is great, that they are great, and that there is a desire to make our country great. So maraming salamat.
Thank you.
I hope this is not the last time, no, that we will be engaging with you as PAC, as CAP, and as an association of schools, knowing how the stakes are just too high for us not to respond. No, in all of given that all of these problems really demean, no, are being Filipinos, are being human beings, as what you said, and our own dignity as a people and as human persons.
I share the hope that we
Gusto
can.
sabihin, sir, bago
No,
natin.
I just wanted to say that I share the hope that we can work together again. Really, there is much to be done. I have nothing but admiration for teachers, especially in this difficult time. It's very difficult to teach during a pandemic. It's even more difficult to speak during a time when we are grappling with the ghosts of fascism. My hats are off to all teachers. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I hope I made some sense. I hope some of the things I said are useful, and I welcome feedback. And I look forward to more of this in the future.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Doc.
Maraming salamat ulit. At many of the things that were presented really go into the next forum tomorrow, which is on social media as a force for good. Yun ang magiging topic natin bukas. So maraming salamat, Mr. John Nery. Again, we are very, very privileged to have you with us this morning, and that there's a video recording of this webinar. So I'm sure ako kanina is taking screenshots because a lot of the concepts there, I really wanted to read about them further and at the same time really digest the implications of all of this, all of this research and literature, okay, on our pursuit of the truth. So maraming salamat ulit, and thank you. We'd like to also acknowledge the partners we had this morning for the presentation of this second of our series, LIDER 2. We'd like to thank, of course, the Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines, the National Advocacy Commission, the Inteligente Publishing Incorporated for cross-posting this webinar as well. And we'd like to invite you to the webinar tomorrow at 10 o'clock. It really flows from the first two webinars we've had for LIDER 2. And it will be Professor Christian Esguerra, host ANC Matters of Fact, and a professor of political reporting at the University of Santo Tomas on the topic social media as a force for good. So we'd also like to acknowledge the team at the PEAC National Office who put this together. Presi Labao from the Training and Development Unit, Butch Evarola, Terence Barrido, Red Gallego from the Information Technology and Information Management Unit, May De Malanta from the Training Unit, Grace Camesa from Finance, and of course our Com and Research Unit, Jenna, Bell, and Denise for all the support for this morning's webinar. So again, we'd like to invite you to the webinar tomorrow, and we hope that you will invite more of your teachers, more of your friends, your own students, to watch the video recording of this very, very relevant webinar. This is Doris Ferrer, Executive Director of PAC, and I hope to see you all tomorrow. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat.